Hey everybody, it's Mike Short from the Don't Waste Your Life YouTube channel, where we try to help you to be present, to be happy, and to be thankful. If you're new to the channel, I'd ask that you subscribe below. And of course, if you are a returning viewer, thank you for coming back. And this week, we're going to be going through book recommendations. So I read a lot of books pretty often. And so each month I'm planning to share some of the books I've read and give you a kind of preview of what I got out of them. And then maybe, you guys will get some insights out of that. I will also share this information via Substack in a written format. But with that, so I want to introduce my first book, which was Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. And I really enjoyed this book because I actually find military books to be very interesting. Some people don't like them, but I find it fascinating. I read Jocko Willink's books as well, and I found them to be very interesting. So what I enjoyed about this book in particular is the amount of adversity that David Goggins was able to overcome throughout his life. He was able to overcome both physical and mental strain, like in the extreme, and just have a very, very tough and really messed up childhood. And so he could overcome all that and become basically the baddest Navy SEAL on the planet, or actually even athlete on the planet. His ability to just endure and to continue to move is incredible. Like, his story is incredible. So the other thing I thought was interesting is he actually grew up in Buffalo, New York, which I thought was kind of cool since I lived in Buffalo. I thought that was kind of a cool fact. He went back through his life story, and it was very interesting in the audiobook format because it was almost like a interview / podcast / book reading. It was very interesting to see how he kind of tied it together. I've never seen anybody do what he did in the audiobook version. But for me, what I really took away from it, like the top, kind of 3 things that I took away from it, are as follows. So the first thing that I took away from this is, regardless of the obstacle that is in front of you, you have to find a way to overcome, and that adversity is what's going to build your strength. Number 2, if you want to grow, you need to work hard in order to make it happen. Without hard work or without the journey, you're not going to grow as a person. From adversity is where you're going to seek out and get the most growth. For the third thing was, he talks about in the book that there's this 40% that is kind of like the run rate, what most people run at. It's almost like having a governor in your engine, in that you can only go at 40% before your brain starts kicking in and saying, hey, you're going too fast, you need to slow down, you're trying too much. And basically what he's saying is that you can give 100%, but your body is going to tell you when you get to 40% that you're painful or something's just not going. And that by breaking through those barriers, it'll actually allow you to give more than what you believe is possible, which I know sounds kind of crazy, but when you're pushed to the edge, like he was in many of these situations, you're able to accomplish things that are kind of beyond, your comprehension. It's almost like it takes you to a whole nother level. And so that's where I feel like the governor, as he kind of says in this, it kind of holds you back. And you get these kind of like pains and other things that are going on. And I'm going to be honest, some of the stories he has said in here are just crazy. Running on broken legs and stuff like that, obviously I wouldn't advise that, but he was just crazy on some of the stuff he did. But it was just amazing what he was able to accomplish between his mind and his body. And, basically I would say nothing was out of his reach. I felt like at the very end of the book was actually very interesting to see where he was stuck somewhere physically, could not move. And the only thing he could be was in his mind. And what actually happened was kind of crazy, because when you're physically not able to do anything, your mind is active, and he was still in those moments. And he's able to reflect on that in the grand scheme of things, all the ways that people slighted him and other ways, they were all as part of the story that got him to where he was. And that actually partway through, he realized, when he was on his deathbed, basically, he realized that, forgiveness and just understanding that people are just broken like him or anybody else, that, you need to have a sense of compassion for others, and that you can't always hold people to your standard. Because actually there's a part in this story I thought was interesting where he was going through some internal training, and he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and he couldn't understand why people weren't going to the standard that he was at. And again, that's the problem. He was holding other people to his standard. not to the standard that they bear, and trying to understand what their goals were. He did not do any of that. And so I felt like that was a very important lesson. And even, Marcus Aurelius says this, is that, you should focus on being a good man or a good woman. Focus on yourself. Focus on the standard that you have for yourself. And so it's basically saying, be lenient with others and be strict with yourself. Because ultimately, that's the only thing you control, is being strict with yourself. So I think that's kind of interesting. So that book, I just finished reading it just recently. It was a very interesting book. So those are the top 3 things I got out of the book. Highly recommend the audiobook version. So if you want to check that out, I also have that linked on my Substack. You can go out there and check it out. So the second book was E-Myth by Michael Gerber. And this is a book that I first read, I think back in like 2006. And I think in 2013, I actually bought the Audible version and I listened to it numerous times. I've listened to this book more times than I can count. It's a very good book. I highly recommend anybody who wants to start a business, they should read this book. I will say some of the concepts are a little bit dated now, or the ideas behind it are a little bit dated, but the framework is really good and explains a lot of things that people that are starting businesses, the challenges that they run into. And so I constantly come back to this material. I even was just having a discussion with one of my employees the other day about how this book and how the roles, and I'll talk about the roles, has an impact on the way that you should look at your business. So if you're a small business owner, I highly recommend this book. This is probably the most recommended book I would have out of all the business books that I have. I've read a lot. Just really helps you understand how to set up and scale and shape your business. It's really important. So there's 3 areas where I felt this book really helped me, which is number 1, focusing on the processes and the systems and not just the people and the personalities. I would say honestly, that's number 1, and number 2 is like building scalable solutions on any company is super important, and not building processes around people, but build them around functions. Those are number 1 and number 2 for that. It's just like, that's huge. And the reason why I give them 2 is because they're slightly different in the way you implement them. One is like overarching, thinking about the processes and scaling it. The other one's thinking about how you work with the personalities and how you then rather focus on the function that you have. So that's really, really important. The third thing is that business owners can have 3 different personalities. This is probably the most key thing. If I had to say this is probably the most important thing I got out of the book as a business owner, is that business owners can have 3 personalities. They have the technician, the manager, and then the entrepreneur. And what I actually liked about this book is they kind of conveyed this through a story. And these roles can be held by one person, but sometimes they may be held by multiple people. So for example, in my own partnership, Charlie is the kind of like the chief operating officer. He kind of keeps everything going. And so he's acting as the technician. He understands how everything is working in the present to kind of keep things just working, the plate spinning in the air. And then you have like me, where as the entrepreneur or the manager, I'm trying to organize work to kind of keep things flowing into the future, and then also like strategizing for the future, for retirement, or planning out what we're going to do when Charlie retires. Like all that stuff, it's more future based rather than the present moment, where the manager is also kind of linking some of that present moment together. So I think it's important to understand that that's not just like, hey, the technician's living in the present, the manager's not either, and the entrepreneur is completely future based. There's a little bit of overlap there. And I think the other thing that kind of helps with the entrepreneur, is he's more focused on the strategic value and strategic principles of the business. And also like the manager and the entrepreneur are focused on how do you build like a franchise prototype. That's the really core concept out of here, is that this book almost speaks to like what a lot of people decide to do, building franchise businesses and building those repeatable processes that anybody could do that. So regardless of the person's skill level, they could achieve the same results as somebody who's highly competent, highly skilled, just by following the documentation, the operating plan that you'd have for that. So highly recommend this book. So with that, this is the first episode. So if you have questions, comments, reach out to me. I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. And next month I'll do 1 or 2 other books and we'll go from there. Thank you guys.